chef and owner of At the Kitchen Table Cooking School here in Hillsdale, New York. This is the third in my series of cooking at home. I'm hoping that these videos will help you to have more confidence in making delicious home-cooked recipes. Most of us are stuck here at home, and what's a better thing to do than cook for your family and yourself? Today we're going to be cooking a plum honey cake. The Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, is in a few days. Rosh Hashanah means head of the year. And at this time of year, we eat lots of sweet things to hope for a sweet new year. One of the most popular things we eat at this time of year is apples dipped in honey. And then we eat honey cake, which is called leikach in Yiddish, and little honey balls called tegla, which are hard to find these days. We're going to be making a honey cake that has plums, beautiful Italian plums, on the bottom of the cake. So we put the plums at the bottom of the springform pan, and when the cake is done, we turn the cake upside down, and just like a pineapple upside down cake, the plums will be on the top. So I've just thoroughly sprayed the bottom of the springform pan with vegetable shortening. And now I'm going to put some dark brown sugar on the bottom, and I'm going to cover the bottom with a thin layer of the brown sugar. And then I'm going to cut up these beautiful plums, take out the pits, and put them cut side down along the whole inside of the pan. So here is the bottom of the pan, brown sugar on the bottom, cut plums on top face down, and it's going to get nice and gooey when it bakes. And when we turn it upside down, they'll be on the top. So now we're going to get the batter going, and I'm using gluten-free flour because we have a family member who's gluten-free, and we want her to feel part of this celebration. So what we're going to do is combine 3.5 cups of all-purpose gluten-free flour. I'm using Bob's Red Mill. I like this company. I think they're very dedicated in everything they do to the highest standard. So that beep you just heard is my oven. I put it on 300, which is pretty slow, or low. It's a low oven, and it's going to bake a long time, almost an hour. So you want it at a low temperature. But whenever you're baking, always make sure to put your oven on well in advance of when you're putting whatever it is into the oven, because it takes ovens a lot longer to heat up than you expect. So that's 2. Here's our 3rd cup. And then a half. So in the practice of keeping kosher, we don't mix milk and meat. So often cake recipes that are going to be coming after a meat meal do not contain butter, which is obviously a dairy product like milk. And so instead, we're going to be using a light olive oil instead of the butter. So now I have the flour in the bowl, and I'm going to add some baking powder and baking soda. Often in recipes you'll find that you need both baking powder and baking soda because they do have different properties. So I have a tablespoon of baking powder, and then I'm going to need a teaspoon of baking soda. And then I'm going to add some dry spices, cinnamon, allspice, ginger, cloves. It's almost like a spice cake. And it's these spices along with the honey that preserves this cake. So it's going to stay moist for probably at least a week. So the first spice that I'm adding is ground ginger. I'm going to put a half a teaspoon of ground ginger, and then a quarter of a teaspoon of the rest of the spices. So that's going to be cinnamon and cloves. I love the smell of ground cloves. And, well, it says nutmeg, but I really don't like the taste of nutmeg, so I use mace. Mace is actually a separate spice from nutmeg, but it grows on the outside of the nutmeg seed, believe it or not. So I put the mace in, and then the last one I want to put in is allspice. So a quarter of a teaspoon of allspice. So I'm going to mix that up well, and then I'm going to add the wet ingredients. So I'm going to beat 4 eggs. I usually use large size eggs. It doesn't specify in a lot of recipes, so if it doesn't, go with the large. So sometimes I find that when I'm breaking an egg, I get a little piece of eggshell in my eggs. And I used to spend a lot of time with my finger trying to fish it out. But then I learned that there's an attraction between the egg and its shell. So if you take your shell, let's say I broke a little piece of shell into my eggs, like this. Come up close. You see I have a little bit of shell in there. So I take the half a shell and I go like this. And the shell is attracted to itself, and there it is. You don't have to go fishing anymore. So one more for 4 eggs. And I'm going to beat them up. And then I'm going to add some brown sugar to these eggs. And I need a cup of brown sugar. So I have a cup of brown sugar here. This is a dry measuring cup. This is a liquid measuring cup. It's really important, especially when you're baking, to use the right tools because they are a little bit different. So the brown sugar is going into the egg mixture. I'm going to mix it up, and then I'm going to pour it into my flour mixture. And then the last 3 ingredients are the oil, some coffee, and the coffee gives it a nice, dense, interesting flavor that you don't quite expect in a cake. And there's a real trick when you're using honey. Honey tends to stick to whatever you put it into. So in my measuring cup, I'm going to put the oil first. And that way the honey will just roll right out. So I need 4 tablespoons of light olive oil. If you don't have light olive oil, you can use any kind of vegetable oil, but don't use a heavy extra virgin olive oil. It'll give too much flavor to this cake. So I put my oil into the measuring cup, and I'm just going to spread it around a little bit because I'm going to put the honey in here next, and I don't want it to stick. So the oil's in, and now I need a cup and 3/4 of honey. So here we go. Often in cakes, you can reduce the amount of sweetening that a recipe calls for. Don't get too extreme in your reduction. But if it calls for like a 1.5 cups, you can probably try using a cup, which is what I'm going to do today, and see if it's okay, because originally recipes called for way too much sweetening. So here we go. The oil has coated the measuring cup, and now the honey comes pouring right out and doesn't even stick. So here's a cup of coffee. I'm pouring it right into the bowl. So we have the dry ingredients, then I added the eggs mixed together with the brown sugar, and now I'm adding the coffee, and we also added the 4 tablespoons of light olive oil. So this is getting stirred until it makes a nice batter, and then I'm going to pour it right on top of those plums. Okay, so no fancy equipment needed at all for this recipe. A bowl and a wooden spoon. I mix it together, but I don't want to over mix it. The batter's going to go, looks nice and smooth. I'm going to pour it right on top of these plums. You want to come a little closer and you can see. And then once it's in there, I'm going to put it in the oven. It's going to take about an hour. And it's the typical way to find out if your cake is done. You pull it out of the oven and you put a toothpick in, and when the toothpick comes out clean, it's time to come out. All right, here I go. Cake's going into the oven, 300 degrees, for about an hour. You want to put it in the center of your oven. That's where the heat is most balanced. About halfway through, you should probably turn it around, because usually the back of an oven is a little hotter than the front. See you in an hour. Okay, 1 hour later. It smells so amazing. So this is I guess a cake probe, and I just put it right in the center, and it comes out clean and dry, so I know it's done. I've allowed it to rest and cool off for about 30 minutes. If it's hot, it's probably going to break. So what we're going to do is take this, called an offset spatula, and I'm just going to run it around the outside of the cake, just inside the pan, just to make sure there's nothing stuck there. And then I'm going to take a plate that's a little bit larger than the pan. I'm going to say a little prayer to the baking gods. And now, 1, 2, 3, flip. And then I open up the spring form. And voila! It has a little bit missing here, but that's no big deal. Just do this. Ouch, last one quite hot. And once it cools off entirely, I'm going to sprinkle it with a little bit of confectioner's sugar, but it looks amazing. So if you celebrate the Jewish New Year, Shana Tova. And if you don't, make this plum honey cake anyway. It's just delicious this time of year. You can only get the Italian plums right now. And happy cooking.